All right, we are still working with one-step equations. We're actually still working with rational numbers as our coefficients. Yesterday we looked at solving them when decimals were the coefficients. Today we're going to look at solving equations when we have a fraction as the coefficient. So just looking at this, we're still going to do the same thing, perform the opposite operation to get the variable by itself on one side. So we've got 4/3 x equals 10. 4/3 x equals 10. This is 4/3 times x. 4/3 times x. So we're going to divide by 4/3. Well, when we divide fractions, remember we do keep, change, flip. We flip the second number, the second fraction. So really what we would be doing is multiplying by 3/4. And so on this next slide, before we answer this question, I want you to get down on your paper somewhere that dividing by a fraction, is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. And remember, the reciprocal of a fraction is the flipped version of the fraction. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2/1. So dividing a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. Dividing a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to think about this as flipping the fraction and multiplying it by its reciprocal. So our first example here, 7/9 times a equals 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply that fraction times the reciprocal, or 9/7. We're going to do 7/9 times 9/7. Now over here, notice something. If we have 9/7 times 7/9, 9 times 7 is 63, and 7 times 9 is 63, and 63/63, if it's the same number on top and bottom, that just simplifies to 1. Isn't that what we want in front of our variable? That's why we've been dividing by that coefficient, because we want 1 in front of the variable. And so doing that, 9 times 7, 7 times 9 gets us 63/63, or just 1a. So when we multiply by the reciprocal, we can just cross those numbers out. We're left with just the variable, which is a. Now if we multiply by 9/7 on the left side, we've got to do the same thing on the right side. So we're doing 5/1 times 9/7. So don't forget to do it to the same thing to the other side as well. 5 times 9 would get us 45. 1 times 7 is 7. I would just go ahead and make that a mixed number. You don't have to make it a decimal. So 45/7 as a mixed number, 7 goes into 45 6 times, and we're left with 3. So a would equal 6 3/7. Sometimes the question might say leave your answer as an improper fraction. If that's the case, you don't have to do anything else. You would have left it as 45/7. But in this case, we'll make that 6 3/7. Okay, so next thing that we'll look at is this next one. 3x/4 equals 12/10. Now, one thing that I want to show about this one first. You've got 3x/4. You might want to write this down as well. If I had 3x/4, that is the same thing as saying 3/4 x. So 3x/4 is the same thing as saying 3/4 x. So anytime I have the variable on top there with that 3, I can pull the variable over to the side. And that's just going to be a little easier to work with, because then we can see, okay, I'm going to flip the fraction in front of the x, and I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So I'll rewrite this as 3/4 x equals 12/20. And then I'll multiply by 4/3. Well, 4 times 3 is 12, and 3 times 4 is 12. 12 over 12 just gets me 1x. And then I'm going to have to multiply the same thing on the other side, so multiply by 4/3 over here. 12 times 4 would get me 48, and 20 times 3 would get me 60. X equals 48 over 60. Now, whenever we are dealing with fractions, you got to ask yourself, okay, what should I probably do with that fraction? Well, I need to simplify it. I can divide 48 and 60 by 2, divide them by 4. I can divide them by 6. We'll divide them by 6. If I divide both of these by 6, I get 8 over 10. And I can divide 8 and 10 by 2. So x should equal 4/5. When we're dealing with fractions, you need to make sure you write your answer in simplest form. So even if it's an improper fraction, you still might need to reduce it by dividing by the same thing on top and bottom. So x would equal 4 over 5 here. Okay, so dealing with these fractions in front of the variable, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, flip the fraction, multiply both sides by that number. So you all go ahead, pause the video, and do these next two on your own. All right, so let's look at the first one there. 3/4 is in front of the y, so I'm going to multiply by 4/3 on both sides. 4/3 times 3/4 gets me 12 over 12, or just 1y. And then it's -9 times 4, which would be -36, over 1 times 3. -36 over 3. I can simplify that. 36 divided by 3 is 12. So y equals -12, or -12 over 1. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on this next one. One thing that I would do is rewrite this first and make that -7/8 x equals -21 over 64. If I have a negative in front of the fraction, what do you think I need to multiply by? -8 over 7. Okay, so I need to multiply this. I'm going to put it in parentheses so it doesn't mix us up. -8 over 7 on both sides. So that's going to cancel out because we're going to end up with 56 over 56. Because a negative times a negative gets us a positive answer. So x would equal -21 over 64 times -8 over 7. Well, it just multiplies straight across. -21 times, or a negative times a negative, our answer is going to be a positive. 21 times 8 would get us 168. And 64 times 7 would give us 448. Now you can simplify this. You can divide by a few different things, but if you simplify it, eventually I'm going to end up with 21 over 56. Divide both of those by 8, I end up with 21 over 56. I can divide both of those by 8 one more time as well. I'm sorry, divide them by 7, not by 8. Divide both of these by 7. And when you divide both of these by 7, you get x equals 3/8. So a lot of simplifying there. Divide by 8, the 168 and 448. Then divide these two by 7. I get x equals 3/8. But with big thing with fractions in front of the variable, flip the fraction, multiply both sides by the reciprocal. All right, so let's look at a couple questions that deal with writing and solving equations. This next one says Valerie needs 2/3 yard of fabric to make each hat for the school play. Write and solve this equation to find how many hats she can make with 6 yards of fabric. Okay, so first step always is to define the variable. What are you trying to find for this question? Well, to find how many hats. So it's going to be H, and that's going to represent hats. Then you've got to ask yourself, okay, what number goes with each hat? Or how much fabric is needed for every hat? Well, 2/3 yards of fabric to make each hat. So 2/3 is what's going to go in front of the H, and that's going to equal 6, because you have a total of 6 yards to use. So that's our equation. We need to get rid of that 2/3 in front of the H. So to do that, we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal, or by 3/2. Those are going to cancel out because you get 6/6 or 1. So you're left with 1H equals 6 times 3 would get us 18, and 1 times 2 is 2, and 18 divided by 2 would be 9. So she can make 9 hats with that 6 yards of fabric. So really the mechanics, the steps that you take to write these equations, even to solve them, is the same. You just have fractions now instead of whole numbers. So I want you to pause the video, answer that one, and then we'll come back and see how you did. Okay, so first thing that you need to ask yourself is, what's the variable going to be? What am I trying to find? I'm trying to find the number of questions that were on the quiz. So we'll say Q was questions. Okay, so then you ask yourself, all right, what number goes with questions? Well, Samantha answered 4/5 of the questions. 4/5 of the questions would be 4/5 times the number of questions, or 4/5 Q. And that equals, she answered a total of 12 questions correct. So basically 4/5 of the total would be 12 that she answered correct. So how many total questions were there on the quiz? We would take and multiply both sides by the reciprocal, multiply by 5/4. That's going to cancel these out, leave us with 1Q. We do 12 times 5, which gets us 60, and then 1 times 4 is 4, and 60 divided by 4 would be 15. So there were a total of 15 questions on the quiz, and Samantha answered 12 of those correctly. Okay, so solving one-step equations, we do the opposite operation. If there's a fraction in front of the variable, we would multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. That gets rid of the fraction in front of the variable. And then we just do it on the other side and simplify our answer. So hopefully you're good with that on one-step equations.